Well, my name is Pamela Hortman, but most of Mineola knows me as Miss Pam because I taught preschool at First Baptist Play School for 14 years. So, granted now a lot of my kids have graduated and are in college, and that's when I decided that it was probably time to find a different career before I started having their children. And that was my worry, that somebody was going to drag their kid into my class and say, look, I had Miss Pam as my first teacher too. So I just felt it was time to get some younger blood, I guess, with those little preschoolers and to move on a little bit. So I walked all the way across the road and went to work at the Mineola Library. And my favorite thing to do here is run programs for kids. A lot of them were in my class when they were 3, so they know me, and I'm still Miss Pam here at the library too. But I mainly work with tweens and teens as opposed to preschoolers. So we have an after-school program, we have a homeschool program, we have a family craft day, and all of those are fun, and we try to get the community involved and find new members everywhere. This year I've started running a bookmobile stop to Lone Star Learning Academy, so at least once a month I still get to interact with preschoolers because I've learned through the years that those are really my people, the preschoolers. The first year that I got hired on at First Baptist Play School, my son Neil was in my class. And anybody who knows Neil knows that he can be a little on the rascally side, or if we're honest, a whole lot on the rascally side. And I figured out real quick that if I can teach Neil at preschool, that I could teach anybody. And they just make me smile. And it was just kind of neat because it was like your kids never grew up. Every year you had 12 more little faces that were looking at you for instruction, looking at you to be the fun person in their life, the person that let them paint and play with Play-Doh. And they just made me happy, and they still do, just being around them. We still have preschoolers that come in here. Miss Mary does the preschool programs, and if she has something to do, then I get to step in and take care of the preschoolers. But I went to college right out of high school, and I was in college when I met my husband, and I was actually going to be a primary school teacher, and it just didn't wind up happening because the kids came along, and by the time the second one came along, I didn't have free child care anymore, and it just wasn't cost efficient. And when Neil was in the 4-year-old program at First Baptist Play School, I got hired on to teach, and I just never left for like 14 years. I go to a church in the Holly Lake area, but we're trying to get a campus going here in Mineola. It's called Summit Heights, and that's really fun. I'm on the rotation to do preschoolers there too. I'm not originally from Mineola. My husband graduated from Mineola High School in 1989, and we moved to Mineola after our first child was born because he wanted her to go to Mineola like he did. I like living in a small town because everybody knows everybody, or most everybody. Or you at least know somebody that knows somebody. But it's easy to help each other out because you know who they are, or oh, well, that's so-and-so's grandma. I'm going to go mow her yard. But then also it's kind of double-sided because since you know everybody, then a lot of times everybody knows you and knows everything about you, and every once in a while it can get a little dicey. But honestly, I like this area because everybody just genuinely seems to care for each other, and there's still the camaraderie, and we help each other out. And I mean, maybe not all the time, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I came from a town that wasn't a lot larger than this, but I still go back every once in a while because that's where my sister lives. And you can just tell that just walking around Walmart, she doesn't know anybody because they just don't take the time that I feel we do to get to know each other. And I like how you can get to town and you can feasibly walk to anything that you need to do. It's not far away because I could park my car here when I get to work, and I walk to the Easy Mart if I need a soda. I've walked to the barbecue place and got a sandwich for lunch because I was too lazy to get in my car. But I like the smallness of it, and I like the people. And I will say, just I think Texas in general might be a little different from most states, and I moved here from Colorado when I was 6. And granted, I was young and I do not have that many memories from Colorado. But it's kind of weird how you just get fixated like everything's the same everywhere. And you have these moments when you realize it's not the same. And the first time that happened to me, I was in high school and we were taking Texas history that semester. And one of my friends was failing. And I was just like, how can you possibly be failing Texas history? We'd been learning, all different aspects of Texas history since we were kids. And she's like, well, I've just never heard all these things before. And I'm like, what do you mean you've never heard these things before? And then it dawned on me that she'd come from a different state. I don't remember which state it was, but, it was all new to her. But in my mind, I just assumed that everybody had Texas history, that it didn't matter what state you were in, that, Texas was the best, so we all had Texas history. And I was just blown away that something once I really thought about it, I was like, well, that was a dumb thing to think. But I just remember thinking, wow. And like I said, I don't remember what state she lived in, but she did not have state history at her school that she came from. They didn't really learn about their state. So that was, kind of a eye-opening experience when I probably really started trying to be a little bit more, learning what was going on around me instead of just taking things for granted. Growing up, my parents were a little bit older than most of my friends' parents. They were 42 and 49 when I was born. And I can remember, like in, primary school, a lot of the kids would always ask me, how come your grandma always comes to your parties? And I was like, that's not my grandma, it's my mom. Because I didn't really, they weren't mean. I think kids might be a little bit meaner nowadays, but then also nowadays, I think it's normal for grandparents to either be the caregiver or to be the daytime caregiver because both parents are working. So I don't think kids today would even notice if a grandma came. But, back in the 80s, they noticed. And, I was probably in high school before I really realized that, hey, my parents are pretty old. And my dad passed away when I was 21, and my mom passed away when I was 24. And so it was hard. I do have an older sister, and we're real close, even closer since, our parents had passed so early in our young adult lives. But I really wasn't that close to my dad growing up because when we moved from Colorado to Texas when I was 5, he stayed behind because he was an iron worker and he, put up the skyscrapers. So naturally there's not that many in East Texas and he wouldn't have feasibly worked very much. So he stayed behind and we only got to see him like twice a year. And so I became real close with my uncle because we lived on the property right next door to theirs, and he just kind of took over that fatherly role for me. And again, he was even older than my parents. So he passed away when I was pregnant with my son, and that was probably, at that time, the most significant loss that I'd ever come up against. And I think about him all the time, and he was the biggest influence on my life. He was the biggest Christian influence on my life, and he was the father figure for me. And it made me sad. He passed when I was pregnant with Neil, so he never knew that he had, a grandson. But he loved Cheyenne, and I know he would have loved Neil too. So I think I was probably in first grade, and it was revival time at my church. I went to Laird Hill Baptist Church when I was little, and I think that was, I always knew all the Bible stories. I think if you grow up in church, you don't question that it didn't happen. I think, I can see if you didn't grow up in church and then, you're a young adult or even a teenager and, somebody's telling you about Noah or David and Goliath or, any of the stories that we know from the Bible. I can see people being skeptical. But since I grew up that way, I never even thought to, wonder, is it true? Is it not true? It was just a fact. And one of the first things that we learned about nonfiction books, and I tell the kids all the time here at the library, if it's nonfiction, then it's true. And if you come to the library and you want to look for a Bible, it's in the nonfiction section, which means everything in that book is true. And so during this revival, when I was probably in like first grade, it was whenever I really felt Jesus telling me that it was time for me to walk down that aisle. I could feel him, just tugging on my heart. And the most amazing thing about that day was that my mom walked down the aisle with me, and she too got baptized at the same time that I did, because she didn't grow up in a church, and she'd never been baptized in her young life. And then, losing her when I did, it just made it more meaningful that was something we'd done together. And I didn't have to worry or wonder where she was when she left this world. I know where she's at, and she's waiting on me. And so I grew up Baptist really my whole life. And even when I moved to Mineola, I started going to First Baptist Church. I had a sister-in-law that went there at the time, and she invited me to come. And I was there, I guess, probably close to 20 years, because I went to church there before I started working there. And I loved it, all the people. You got to know so many people, and everybody was sweet and kind, and you felt the fellowship and the fun. I can remember I always just got goosebumps walking into the building, like, God was waiting on me. Oh, she's here. And I loved, sharing that with the kids, and hoping that even, at 3, and even when I taught Sunday school, I taught kindergartners, and even at those ages, they might not really be quite old enough, to really feel that tug at their heart, but you can plant that seed. Like whenever I talked about, I always grew up knowing that all those stories were true. It was because of my Sunday school teachers that told me those stories when my mom took me to Sunday school. So I guess, that is the thing that I want most from my time as being Miss Pam, is for those kids to at least have a seed or a foundation to build a faith, whether they go to church or not. Okay, and naturally, since I did have the same job for around 14 years, and it involved 3- and 4-year-olds, there's many stories, because it's so funny how their little minds work. For example, I had this one little girl in my class, and many of them, not just her, but many of them just assume that we live at the church. And if they see you somewhere outside the church, they're just blown away. And so one day I was at Walmart, and she was with her mom, and I was with my husband, and we, just met them face to face. And she was just looking my husband up and down, head to toe, like 3 times. And finally she just looked at her mom, and she's like, "Who is that with Miss Pam?" And her mom had went to school with Bobby, so she knew who he was. And she's like, "Well, that's her husband, Mr. Bobby." And she just had, that sassy little look on her face. And I will say that she's a senior this year at Mineola High School. But she had that same sassy little look on her face, and she's like, "Oh." Like, he really didn't deserve that kind of attention. And I've had a mom tell me one time they came through town, and it was dark, and somebody had left a light on in one of the upstairs Sunday school rooms that you could see from the road. And they were driving through, and she said her son's like, "Look, Mom, Miss Pam's still up." So that was always funny that they thought we lived there. And I always thought to myself that one day I was going to write a book about my adventures at play school. And As Far as I've Got is the title. I'm thinking it's going to be From Maddie Patty to Dare Bear. And some of you may know who Maddie Patty is. He graduated last year. And Dare Bear was in my last class. Kids tend to get nicknames when they're in my class, and sometimes they last. I still call Maddie Patty when I run into him. I don't care that he's in college now. And the thing that I took away the most from working at play school all those years was just the friends I met, my play school moms. Sometimes I was able to minister to them. Sometimes they ministered to me. I think about all my kids. If their parents, share something on Facebook, I have this habit of hashtagging it Miss Pam's class forever, no matter how old they are, because they'll always be mine. And I love every sweet little body that ever came through that door of my classroom, and I always will. And all the sweet mamas and all the sweet ladies that I taught with through the years have made me the lady that I am now. I wasn't, quite the Christian I was when I first started. My husband didn't go to church, and I would take the kids to Sunday school, and I would stay for church sometimes, but I didn't really read my Bible every day. I didn't take that extra time, with God. Mainly, I had 2 preschoolers, and just through planning lessons for all those years, that was like a devotion in itself. And just telling those Bible stories, year after year after year, it just, really, cemented it home for me that that the Bible is real and that God is alive. And I love working here too. I still get to be with the kids. I will say that is probably my least favorite thing about working here at the library, is that I cannot exercise my faith. We're a public building, and we service the public, and we can't really openly acknowledge that we're anything, whether it's faith or, that just anything that anybody could get upset about. We're here to serve the public and love everybody. So sometimes, that makes me a little sad, because one time I wanted to start a Bible school program here, or a Bible study program for ladies, and I was told that I could have the program, but that I could not lead the program, because that would, brand me as a Christian, and it might upset other people that come in the library. So that is my least favorite thing about working here, but other than that, everything is great.